Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here, episode 2519 of The Tom Woods Show. Here with Dan McCarthy, editor of Modern Age. Are you covering the convention?
No, I am actually going to New York as we record this, and I'll be doing a talk on foreign policy there.
Okay, because I wasn't sure when you were saying you were traveling. I didn't know if you were actually going to the convention or not. Okay. Well, anyway, Dan has become like a part of the Tom Woods Show family. People look forward to episodes when I have him on, and it seemed like, in fact, after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, my first person I thought to talk to was Dan. And Dan, I read your article the second I found out about it on this subject. But then I also talked to Orrin McIntyre, I just had on before, and I'm planning to talk about with him. But let's jump ahead a bit for 1 second, because as we're recording this, only a couple of hours ago, if even that, we found out that JD Vance has been named as the vice presidential nominee for Donald Trump. And we did an episode on this, Dan, on likely VP choices. And I remember you saying, well, the best choice would be JD Vance, but you weren't entirely sure of his chances. And doggone it, he got the Dan McCarthy bump or something, but there he is.
Yeah, I became pretty much 80% sure as of recent weeks for a variety of reasons. JD Vance stood out from the competition very profoundly as someone who would help electorally. Because, in the conventional mindset that most people have, if you look at the mainstream media, if you look at, a lot of mainstream conservative institutions, they think the most important thing here is increase the share of the African-American vote, increase the share of the women's vote, increase the share of the Hispanic vote, all of which are good things. Donald Trump certainly should be trying to do that. But if you actually look at what happened in 2020, he wound up losing some of the working class white male vote that he had won in 2016. And because he'd lost, a little bit of his margin with those voters, he actually wound up losing the 2020 election. So JD Vance, who is, someone who presents himself very strongly as a working class, kind of steel town conservative, blue collar conservative, that's a very great pick for, the Rust Belt states. And I think that's going to, actually boost Trump's chances a great deal. But Vance is also, sort of the best pick by far when it comes to policy and when it comes to his general awareness of the danger that the neocons present and the trouble with being a sort of go along to get along Republican. JD Vance isn't afraid to, be a bit of a bare knuckle brawler, and that's exactly what we need.
I want to read to you, if I may, something that somebody in my mastermind wrote who lives in Ohio, and maybe you can assuage his concerns here. He says, now, as the Ohioan in our little group, he says, I'm indifferent on this one. Vance has an interesting upbringing, and it comes out a lot. He has a very populist or maybe populist mindset, and if it helps the poor, or if he thinks it does, I should say, he will be on it like stink on a monkey. Speaking of which, he's collaborated with Elizabeth Warren a couple of times on bills focused on credit cards. So from that standpoint, he makes me nervous, but he will lockstep with Trump. Now, the strategy side is where I really don't like this. Ohio is Trump's to lose. He will not gain much here, but Ohio and the Senate in general may lose some. The Senate is already a thin margin for Republicans, so pulling a senator is not wise. Further, Ohio has had a D and R for as long as I've lived here. Brown, D, the incumbent, will win again. So if Vance becomes VP, there's a strong chance we get another D senator, Tim Ryan, because the current pool of GOP guys is abysmal. I hope I'm wrong, but from Ohio, that's the fear. What do you say?
Well, it's about much more than Ohio in terms of what Trump is trying to get electorally out of picking JD Vance. Your correspondent is correct. Ohio is going to solidly go for Trump without any trouble. The question is, what about states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin? Those are the battlegrounds. And the idea is that JD Vance will have the same kind of appeal that worked in Ohio is also going to work for similar demographics in those other states also. And I think that's correct. That's certainly a gamble that's worth trying. And again, if you actually look at the 2020 map, or if you look at 2024 map, even though it's important for Trump to win Sunbelt states like Arizona and Georgia, for that matter, which unfortunately was lost in 2020, The most crucial, battlegrounds in terms of the electoral votes available are Pennsylvania, Michigan. They're the Rust Belt states. So Vance is a very good pick in that regard. It's not just about Ohio. I do share your correspondent's concern about the Senate. It's always a terrible thing to lose a good senator. That said, it's easier to replace senators than it is to get good vice presidents on a Republican ticket. Because in fact, I don't think, in my lifetime or in yours, Tom, has there ever been a good vice president on a Republican ticket? Ever? Think about how the vice president office has been used by neocons as their headquarters within, all of the past, 4 or 5 Republican administrations. So with Trump, I can tell you that Mike Pence, long before, he had his falling out with Trump, Pence and his people were already going around Washington telling certain meetings of conservatives, hey, don't worry about the Trump agenda because we're going to stop it. And they also blackballed a number of very good, non-interventionist appointees in foreign policy. So the Pence people were really awful. And, we have to make sure we don't have another Pence here. And I think Vance is the right person to make sure that there are no neocons acting as gatekeepers in the administration. Go back before Pence, and what do you have? You have Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney as George W. Bush's vice president. I don't think I need to say anything about just how awful that was. Well, if you go back before that, you have George H.W. Bush. And maybe it seems like, well, Dan Quayle, people said he was stupid, but he wasn't really that offensive as a vice president. What could the problem with Dan Quayle have been? Well, who was the chief of staff to Dan Quayle when he was vice president?
Bill Kristol.
A certain guy by the name of William Kristol, exactly.
I gave it away. So, I couldn't help it.
No. I mean, the awfulness, one can't contain the visceral reaction against it. And then, of course, before that, you had George H.W. Bush himself as VP to Ronald Reagan. And all the great old school, serious Reaganites will tell you that George H.W. Bush was no friend to Ronald Reagan. And as soon as George H.W. Bush became president, basically all the old Reaganites were thrown out the window. I mean, the Bush machine cleaned house on anyone who had supported Reagan back in 1980 over George H.W. Bush. They were vindictive and they were thorough. And of course, George H.W. Bush kind of started us on a, basically 30-year path of neoconservative disasters. So the vice presidential slot is extremely important. And JD Vance, I think, is the person I trust most with that position.
I hadn't thought of it until you said that, Dan, that in my lifetime, Spiro Agnew was vice president for a very, very brief time at the very beginning.
I'm a couple years younger than you are, so that's the only reason I get to use that phrase.
But as a toddler, I didn't get much impression of Spiro Agnew, but you're right, that does go back quite some time. I had JD Vance on the Tom Woods Show some years ago. We talked about Hillbilly Elegy, which, by the way, is a really, really great and interesting book. I mean, absolutely absorbing. And this was at a time when he wasn't in politics. It wasn't obvious that he was destined for a political career necessarily, but the book just took on a life of its own. And as you can imagine, especially when I was doing 5 episodes a week, Dan, I had to read a lot of books. So invariably, you have to skim them and get the gist. But I read every word of that book, and almost against my will. I was very busy. I was in the middle of moving from one state to another at that time, but I found it absolutely compelling. So now I'm joking. We have this expression, the Tom Woods Show bump. You get the Tom Woods Show bump, meaning you sell some extra books when you're on here and you see your sales rank go up or this or that. But Dan, the Tom Woods Show bump is really more potent than we thought. The guy's on his way to the White House, for heaven's sake. But what about this complaint that you hear from some diehard Trump people? Maybe you're not hearing it today because of the general euphoria, but there was some caution that Vance had been a never Trumper.
Yeah, I mean, almost everyone, whether they're in politics or in journalism, has said something bad about Trump at some point or another. And that includes JD Vance. Now, JD Vance went farther than most in some of the things he was saying against Donald Trump back in 2016. But you could kind of tell why he was doing it. And unfortunately, I saw a lot of other people in the same basket. Basically, what a lot of conservatives who wanted to see the American right turn away from neoconservatism, turn towards a more middle American philosophy, turn towards a more defensive and realistic kind of foreign policy, away from an imperial one. A lot of, my friends in that kind of mindset looked at Trump and said, this is a disaster for us because he's kind of saying some of our things, but he's going to be blown out and lose by a landslide to Hillary Clinton, and we're all going to be humiliated, and our position is going to be demolished by it. So we have to distance ourselves as much as possible from Donald Trump before he loses. And of course, their calculation was wrong. Donald Trump didn't lose. And their judgment was wrong too, because frankly, even if Donald Trump was going to lose in 2016, the right thing to do would have been to say, hey, he's right on these most important issues. Therefore, whether or not you're the kind who votes for anyone, you should at least, say, give him credit for being correct and say, hey, this is remarkable that a politician, is saying these things. So I think Vance, and Vance had more responsibility than most of us, right? So even before Hillbilly Elegy, he was a guy who had made a lot of money. He had connections on Silicon Valley. He was someone who clearly was going to be a player in the world in one capacity or another. And here he was championing these ideas, which you find in Hillbilly Elegy. And I think he felt a tremendous pressure to be the representative for those views. And he was afraid that if indeed, as all of his, smart buddies from Yale and elsewhere may have been telling him, this Donald Trump thing is going to be a disaster, that everything that he cared about and invested in was going to be lost on Trump. Now, very much to Vance's credit, he realized that he was wrong about that. And he has been absolutely staunch, in defending Donald Trump and, going above and beyond, even when it wasn't safe and, many times, in the years since then. So I think Trump is not someone who wants to take any gambles on his personnel picks after the experience he had in the first administration. So I think he has looked very carefully at JD Vance. I know that other people, such as Donald Trump Jr., have also had a very close look at JD Vance. I hear that Matt Gaetz was probably advising Trump to take JD Vance. So there's been a lot of vetting, not just in terms of research into someone's background, but actually getting to know someone and getting to know where they're really coming from and why they may have made the mistakes they made in the past and why they are not going to make those in the future.
I'm told, although I haven't seen it myself, but I have no reason to doubt it, that Karl Rove is unhappy with the choice. I guess that's self-explanatory, but maybe, what does he want?
I have not seen it either, but what I hear about his level of apoplexy, if anything, if you needed any reassurance about JD Vance, seeing the reactions from Karl Rove and Bill Kristol and all the other usual suspects, that by itself confirms you, hey, this is a good pick.
But yet, isn't Karl Rove's claim to fame that he is, like a political strategist? So
but he's an idiot. He's an idiot. So, the 2000 election, which is the first one that Karl Rove runs, it's very nearly a disaster for Republicans, right? So they lose the popular vote, and that doesn't really matter. But they come really darn close to losing the electoral college vote as well. And you have to have this, this arduous recount in Florida before you finally get, to a point where George W. Bush is the winner and it goes to the Supreme Court. This is not, a win is a win, but if you are a political professional, you can't go out and boast about this as a great win. You can't say, hey, this proves what a wonderful campaign manager I am, because frankly, you came as close as anyone possibly can to blowing it without actually losing, right? Then in 2004, George W. Bush actually has a very anemic reelection. Look at his electoral college margin in 2004 and compare that to Donald Trump's electoral college vote in 2016. Donald Trump actually gets more electoral college votes in 2016 than George W. Bush gets being reelected in 2004. I think Rove is vastly overrated. He was, not a mastermind of getting, Republicans elected, certainly not a mastermind of presidential elections. He humiliated himself in subsequent elections, with his false predictions. So I think in terms not only of his ideology, but also his judgment, the fact that he's against you is probably a good sign that you have, not only virtue, but also luck on your side.
Hey, all you good people out there, I am thrilled and delighted and honored to be able to promote things I truly believe in. And for example, a lot of you folks are concerned about online privacy, and I get to promote a solution to that. I get to promote a solution that allows you to use online tools without being spied on or manipulated or censored. And we know that Google, Microsoft, Apple, Zoom, and the tech bros running big tech today think your private data is their playground for their advertising networks and AI systems. Well, one way you can avoid all those things is not using the quote-unquote free tools big tech wants you to use. Federated Computer, on the other hand, offers a full replacement for Google, Microsoft Office 365, Slack, Zoom, all the tools of big tech, but designed for people who care about privacy, don't want to be treated like cattle, and want a great price. Everything's encrypted end-to-end, fully backed up daily. We're talking about private email, file storage, group chat, WordPress, all the applications you need for your business or team, all bundled into one easy monthly subscription that's 10 times less expensive than big tech offerings. You get unlimited users, fantastic personal customer support from real human beings. How about that? And the assurance that your data is your data and not big tech's. Well, visit www.federated.computer for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months. So how about that? A company that thinks its job is to provide you with services for a great price rather than spying on you or shutting you up or manipulating you. Take your first step along with other happy Woods listeners towards digital freedom. Visit www.federated.computer today for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months. Let's switch gears a bit and indeed say a little something about what happened on Saturday, namely the shooting. Now, as I said, your article I read immediately, and it summed up. I mean, it had the details in it that we knew at the time, but it was really more of an analysis of what it all means and what it portends. And it seems like this has to, in some way, propel Trump forward, because even if it doesn't bring, one thing it does do is it does electrify the base. Like, even if there were people who were thinking, I'm sick and tired of this blowhard, I just can't bring myself to pull the lever, now they will. I think a lot of those people absolutely will. And I do think there are people, as I was telling Orrin McIntyre, there are a lot of people who make their electoral decisions, their voting decisions, Dan, on grounds other than they've analyzed the policy positions of the candidates, and all you have to do is just think for a moment about the images that are projected by Biden versus Trump. I mean, Biden seems like he can barely get around and communicate. Trump goes down with a apparent gunshot wound and then stands up and puts his defiant fist in the air. I mean, the symbolism is not particularly subtle there. At the same time, undecided voters are fickle and, can change their minds. But you would think that, it's crazy we have to talk this way, but you would think that his being shot at would actually be a net plus for him, seeing that he lived.
It's true. And in fact, not only has the base been energized by that image, but I've been pleasantly surprised by the number of left-wing progressive bloggers who are just, they may in many respects be awful human beings, but they still have just enough humanity that they can recognize when someone's doing something brave and heroic and, is making the right decision in a split second. So even a lot of, left-wing voices that I otherwise would be quite critical of, and I'm not talking about, your sort of DC journalist types, but, some of the, left populist types, basically. They've looked at that image and they've said, this is inspiring and this actually is, the correct thing. One of the points I try to make in my article for the American Conservative is, Trump reacted in a split second, and he reacted in a way that didn't follow the rule book. So the Secret Service is huddling around him, and their job is to huddle him off that stage and to surround him, prevent him from exposing his head or anything else, and just get him out of the danger zone. And Trump actually kind of fights back against them a little bit. And he, forces his head up and he raises his, fist in defiance. Now, there would be a certain mindset that said, oh, this is not safe. This is not prudent. But Trump realized, it's not a bullet can kill a man, but it's a sign of cowardice that kills a movement. And it's a sign of cowardice that really demoralizes a whole country. And Trump, was not willing to be cowardly and was not willing to demoralize not only his supporters, but really anyone watching that screen, anyone in the country, by showing himself to be afraid and showing himself to be cowering. Instead, he was defiant, he was brave, he stood up. That's exactly the right thing. That's exactly what a leader should do. And the contrast between that split-second decision when Trump is literally under fire. I mean, there's, several shots have been fired at him. At least one has hit him. Other shots may be coming. You have no idea what's happening next. The contrast between Trump's ability to react correctly in that circumstance and the fact it took 90 minutes for Joe Biden to say anything. He couldn't even send out a tweet saying, this is awful. My prayers are with, Donald Trump and his family. It took 90 minutes before Biden could muster up any kind of response whatsoever, which I thought just confirmed what everyone fears about Biden. Biden is not just a terrible president. He's now so far gone in terms of his ability to react to anything that, in an emergency, he's nothing. He's a plank. So I thought that was shocking and just the most possible night and day, starkest possible night and day contrast between what we saw from Trump.
Well, I assumed it meant that a whole bunch of people in the White House were trying to figure out what the correct response should be. But that again goes to show who's in charge here. Because if I were president, I'd say I would have written something out and it would have been sent, and that would have been the end of it. I don't care what the rest of you people say, or I wouldn't have been in a position where a committee of 8 have to figure out, well, what should we put out in the president's name? Like that, we wouldn't have been in that position. So given that these political like predictor websites you can take with a grain of salt, but they have their track record, I suppose. And they've been saying in recent days that the likelihood of a Trump victory is ever higher. So at some point, do you have the sense that some Democrats are shifting now into just flat out obstructionist mode, that, okay, we recognize the inevitable, so now let's organize and figure out how we can minimize the damage that this guy does?
I've had a hunch for a long time that a lot of congressional Democrats have realized it's actually in their interest for Joe Biden to lose. And so, they, not that they really want him to lose, but they've been accepting of, the probability that Joe Biden was going to be defeated even before his disastrous debate and even before the assassination attempt. Basically because, Democrats in Congress, above all, know very well how American political cycles work. And having Donald Trump back in office is probably a good way to boost Democratic chances in the 2026 midterms and the chance that the Democrats might take the House back. Now, obviously, I hope that's not the case. I hope Trump, succeeds to such a degree that voters don't have the usual, sort of a backlash against the party in power when it comes to those midterm elections. But I think ordinary Democrats are counting on that. They think 2026 is going to be another 2018, and they feel very good about that. Whereas they don't feel so good about Joe Biden getting reelected, or maybe Biden gets reelected and then gives way to Kamala Harris. But either way, that's going to be a really bad leader for the Democrats to go into the 2026 midterms with. And then I think really ambitious Democrats who want to be president, they're looking at this and they're saying, you know what, this is a maelstrom I don't want to jump into the middle of. I don't want to try to dethrone a sitting Democratic president. I don't want to try to skip ahead of Kamala Harris, a black woman, and try to, wrest the nomination from her. I don't want to, go up against Donald Trump because you just never know what's going to happen. I think Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer and others are biding their time. They're happy to see, a one-term Republican, because Trump can only serve one more term, a one-term Republican get elected this time, and then they will try to reclaim the honor of the Democratic Party in 2028. So I think those kind of calculations were already in play, and everything we've seen since then has probably reinforced all of that. And in some cases, where these impulses might have been subconscious before, now, in fact, you even have, Politico and other publications quoting unnamed Democrats saying, yeah, we're basically, we're resigned to losing this election, for the White House at least. So, I think that said, I think that it's a mistake to write off Joe Biden. This guy is, the last part of his mind or body that is functioning is his desire to cling to office. He is absolutely determined that, it's either, stay in office or drop dead. That is the choice Joe Biden is giving himself, basically. And he will stop at nothing, and his family will stop at nothing to keep him in office. When I say that, I don't mean that, people should entertain conspiracy theories, but I mean, he's going to be extremely tenacious, and he's going to be, whatever focus he is still capable of as a human being, as a leader, is going to be channeled into his election strategy. We can talk maybe in a few minutes about what I think that strategy is going to look like over the next couple of months.
Let's talk for a minute about strategy, although in parentheses, I'll say, I presume that, of course, Harris would be viewed as the natural heir apparent because that's just the pecking order when you were the vice president. But if that ticket loses, then 4 years down the road, she, I think, more or less forfeits that presumed crown, and then it's anybody's game. Is that about right?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, okay. So then I could imagine an ambitious Democrat saying, go ahead, give it to Trump for 4 years, and then we can start fresh, and Kamala starts at the same starting line as anybody else. So let's start with Trump. He came onto the scene emphasizing several main issues, And you could ask him about anything, and of course he has an opinion on everything, but he emphasized a few things so that whether you loved him or you hated him, you absolutely knew what he was interested in and where he stood on those things. So have those issues changed now that we're in 2024 rather than 2016? And what message is he trying to convey other than Joe Biden has obviously made your life worse?
They have not changed, and I've actually been pleasantly surprised by the amount of message discipline that Trump has exhibited up to now. His message has been about immigration, and his message has been about foreign policy and staying out of these conflicts that Joe Biden has got us into, and that all the presidents before Trump were getting us into. Trump will talk about other issues as well, especially his legal problems. The lawfare that's been waged against him, and he's right to talk about that to some degree. My fear was that Trump would obsess about it, would only talk about the travails that he's been facing, and that he would neglect to talk about immigration and foreign policy. I think his talk about the economy is a little bit changed from 2016. He does still talk about trade, but of course inflation is on everyone's minds, so he talks a lot about that, and he's right to do so. So I don't think Trump has really changed. I think he's, if anything, become more disciplined in 2024 than he had been in 2016, and 2020 was just a disaster. So I'm really impressed by that. I think the change you might see going forward between, how close, he came within half an inch of death basically yesterday, as we record this, and between the near-death experience and, the opportunity this creates for Trump to now become maybe a unifying figure as he seems to see himself, that may lead Trump to, do some things which I kind of thought he might try in 2016 that he might now, or in 2017 after he got elected, they might now really want to try, which is to kind of create a grand coalition and start to, kind of leave some of the Republicans and conservatives behind and try to appeal to, a very broad swath of people who otherwise don't like him. And, there's a fine balance to be struck there, because the idea that the president should, constitutionally be the president for the whole country, not just his party, is a noble idea. But at the same time, Trump shouldn't jettison the people who've worked very hard to put him where he is and to, put him back in the White House, and, the people who've supported him, on his issues and on conservative issues as well. So, a lot of pro-lifers are very concerned about the watering down of the pro-life plank in the platform. And, JD Vance himself had to go out and basically, this was almost what signaled to me that Vance was certainly going to be the VP pick. The fact that he went out and he defended in very strong terms, basically the Trump moderate position on abortion now, which is just leave it to the states. We don't want to have any kind of, federal intervention to stop abortions. And the idea that, the abortifacient, medication, abortifacient, morning after pills and whatnot, that these are going to be taken off the table and we're not going to do anything against them. Pro-lifers are very disappointed and very discouraged by that. But, you understand why Trump's doing it. The question is kind of just what comes after Trump and what comes with, the new judges that are put in, what comes with, the ability of state legislators and maybe Congress to, step into the void here.
Hey, everybody, here's how to unlock a 12% return on silver. Most of the time, you buy gold and silver and you just sit there with it. Now, that's better than what most people do, which is not buying any gold and silver. But thanks to Monetary Metals, where our old friend Jeff Deist is now, you can put those precious metals to work for you. Silver, by the way, is a tangible asset, a great way to diversify any investment portfolio. But with Monetary Metals, you don't just own physical silver. You own silver that works for you to generate more silver, growing your total ounces over time. Well, as I said, you can now earn 12% annual interest on silver, paid in silver, in their latest offering if you are an accredited investor. Click the link in the description or just head to tomwoods.com/silver to learn more. You've heard me talk about Monetary Metals plenty. I've had an account there myself for about 2 years, and they are revolutionizing the way we invest in gold and silver. They've been paying interest on gold and silver for over 8 years, and that helps you grow your wealth in real tangible assets. You want a true alternative to saving in the dollar? Well, you've got it. You can generate a yield on gold and silver with Monetary Metals. Head over to tomwoods.com/silver to find out more. Does Biden simply try his best to rally the various I mean, basically, he's got a whole bunch of different constituencies, some of which can be identified on demographic grounds. So he's got racial interest groups that he can appeal to. He's got the LGBT people he can appeal to. So all these different identity categories. He could run like that, and certainly he would get plenty of support. But at the same time, that would mean he's semi-forfeiting a huge swath of Americans by doing that. So do you see him trying to balance this in some way?
Biden is going to go full strength after a lot of old-fashioned Democrats, people who look at Joe Biden and think of, the Democrats of the Kennedy era or earlier. What that means is he's going to lean, I think, very heavily into labor unions, very heavily into, the New Deal pitch to the working class and to middle America. And he seems right now to be overshooting the mark. So you may have seen in the past 24 hours or so, as we record this, that this cockamamie scheme of Biden's to have, it sounds like national rent control. This is something that Biden is actually floating. It's insane. But it sounds like, Biden will go full Bernie Sanders and beyond, trying to, bring economic interests into his coalition and not just rely on the cultural and racial interests that you mentioned. The other thing that Biden's going to do, and I think Republicans should take this very seriously sooner rather than later, is that, right now, Biden and all the other Democrats are saying, everyone just needs to tone down the radical rhetoric. And maybe some of our people have gone a little too far in some of the things they've said about Trump. This is going to transition from being, hey, let's all, let's have a kumbaya, let's all, be, much more ironic now. This is going to transform into bad words or, heated rhetoric is the worst thing that can ever happen. It's hate speech. Who is the focus of hate speech? Who is the number one, exponent of hate speech? It's Donald Trump, of course. So this message of kumbaya is going to turn into kumbaya means everyone except Trump and the deplorables. You're going to see them go massively after JD Vance. JD Vance has said things about, for example, family life and its importance, and women wanting to have families rather than always going into the workforce. The left is going to tear that stuff out of context. Is going to say JD Vance is a misogynist. They're going to go after him like you've never seen. It's going to be a nightmare. In some ways, it may even be that they go after him harder than they went after Trump. And with Trump, they're also going to point to this deranged kid who, tried to assassinate him. And they're going to say, okay, maybe we can't find anything definitive about his ideology. So, apparently he was a registered Republican, but he also had donated to, Act Blue, to a Democratic super PAC. He had very faint political engagements, and they're kind of all over the place. But the one thing people can definitely say about Thomas Crooks, the attempted assassin, is he was very much into guns. He had a gun. He tried to kill Trump with a gun. He was a member of a gun club. He tried to join his school shooting club. What they're going to say is that Donald Trump was very nearly killed by political violence that he basically set the stage for, both in terms of Trump's own rhetoric and also in terms of his view of firearms. And they're going to try to destroy the Republicans by saying this is a party of political violence and violent rhetoric. You put those two things together and you have chaos. I just wrote a column earlier today where I say Biden is going to try to resurrect his campaign message from 2020. And that message was Donald Trump is a guy that if you elect, you're going to have riots in the street like you had in 2020. You're going to have all kinds of political violence, all kinds of instability. You'll be ashamed to be an American. If you elect Joe Biden, on the other hand, you'll have a calm leader. You will have quiet in the streets. Everything's going to go back to normal. So that's, I think, what Biden is desperately going to try to do once again. And he's going to have, of course, the media helping him out with this. They're going to get over their current call for him to be deposed. They're going to get through the bargaining stage and get on to acceptance, and then they'll be back supporting the ghost of Joe Biden for 2024.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. And when they say, there won't be any riots in the streets if you elect Biden, because we'll call them off. We won't call them into action if Biden is in office. So, yeah, I mean, who even knows what on earth they're going to try to throw at Trump in a potential second term? But my thought is cross that bridge when you come to it. But yeah, I agree with you about not ruling out a possibility that Biden could still win and not being complacent, because there is we move in circle. Well, you live in the D.C. area, so you probably see more Biden people than I do, but still, there is an enormous number of people, of a vastly larger percentage of the public than should remotely be in support of Biden, who are in support of Biden and who are immovably in support of him, again, for largely, for some people, for identity-related reasons. What do you think? What do you think a Vance versus Kamala vice presidential debate looks like?
Yeah, first let me say something about the neighborhood where I live. So I live, in one of the Northern Virginia, D.C. suburbs. And it's interesting because, you do have some Republicans in this area. And you kind of have a mix, because some of the Republicans are exactly what you would expect of Beltway Republicans. These are your Mitt Romney true believers, your Nikki Haley true believers. It was very interesting to see in my suburb during the Virginia gubernatorial race, where Glenn Youngkin winds up winning that, Republican, that you actually had a lot of Youngkin signs, far more Youngkin signs than I ever saw Trump signs, and that's an indication of just where these Northern Virginia Republicans are coming from. That said, I was delighted the other week to find out. I walked around a corner. I forget why. I was trying to check out some something that I thought was going wrong with some a public building nearby. There seemed to be something wrong with it. I walk around the corner and I look at one of my neighbor's yards, and what do I see? I see a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sign. So that's, it's good to live, even in Northern Virginia, you can still live someplace where you have people who are not, reading from the script, who've torn up those note cards you refer to in your introduction to the show. So yeah, the debate between Kamala Harris and JD Vance is going to mop the floor of her. I think there's no doubt about that. And Vance, I think one of the brilliant things about choosing him, he's a writer. He's someone who has always been a good speaker, and a really good speaker, and really good, in fact, in the conventional sense. But sometimes I thought that kind of worked against him. You could have people who deliver a good speech, but you just say, you know what, I want to know if there's a real human being behind that speech. And what I've noticed is that recently I saw Vance give a talk just last Thursday or Friday, and he had, a kind of a confidence and an easygoing, naturalness when talking about very serious subjects from the stage, which I thought was masterful. I mean, it was, he didn't have Ronald Reagan's humor, but he had the kind of easygoing character that you would expect of, someone who might be called a great communicator. So I think he way outclasses Kamala Harris on every level. And there's no way that I can imagine where she would come up ahead in a vice presidential debate.
Well, I mean, I don't know that it even benefits her to have that debate, but obviously she can't. If she says no, then that looks even worse. So I guess they have to go through with it. So I guess they'll pile her up the best they can with one-liners and distraction techniques or whatever. But you're right. I mean, he's got an interesting temperament, and in that way, I think he's an interesting counterbalance to Trump himself, because he can, like any of us, can be outraged at things, but he also he comes across as a reasonable, knowledgeable, affable guy, empathetic. I think he leaves a good first impression. It's good for him that he doesn't have a long political career behind him, and that he's done a whole bunch of different things, and he's had a wide variety of experiences, and his background means that he's had experiences virtually none of us have had. I mean, that in my interview, Dan, I talked to him about the fact that his grandmother poured lighter fluid on his grandfather and set him on fire. I mean, that's dysfunctional. Like, that's like dysfunction at a level most of us, thank heavens, will never experience. And so I think he can also speak to a lot of people. I mean, he can speak to really smart and wealthy people, but he can also speak to the down and out. So from a sheer political standpoint, he seems pretty strong to me.
And beyond politics, he actually understands the roadmap. So with your typical Republican politician, you could look at, any of the others who were on the short list, and either they were neocons themselves or they wouldn't know what a neocon was. And either of those is an extremely dangerous thing in a politician. JD Vance, on the other hand, he knows not only what a neocon is, he knows personally who some of these neocons are. He was even, at one point he wrote for a website that David Frum was running. And now David Frum, of course, says, oh, JD Vance is, this horrible, he's Hitler's, the second in command now. And JD Vance says, just what a jerk this Frum guy is, He's not just someone who's wrong on the issues, but the fact that Frum would, go after people that he once, had at least a professional relationship with. Vance knows exactly what they're made out of. And you're not going to see that, I think, in a Vance vice presidential office. So, and that's really important because even Trump, Trump has the right instincts on so many things, but Trump doesn't know what a neocon is really, not intellectually, not in terms of philosophy. And if he's presented a long list of, 100 or 200 possible appointees for an administration, certainly this was the case in 2016. It may even be the case now. If he's presented with this list, he's not going to know, who's a neocon and who's not, or, what kinds of networks he needs to follow up on to figure out where they really are coming from. JD Vance, on the other hand, he knows all of this stuff very well, and so do the people around him. So this is the biggest setback the neocons have faced since, the nomination of Donald Trump in 2016, the first time. And in fact, nomination of Trump in 2016 was a bigger setback for them, but this comes very close to it. This is basically this is not just winning a battle or winning the war. This is winning, future battles and future wars. It really is a seismic shift in terms of the direction of the conservative movement and the Republican Party. Assuming, of course, that Trump wins, assuming that, Vance is in a good position for 2028, we could yet see politics take a very shocking turn that, leads us in a completely different direction. Right now, it seems as if you've really, this is like Hercules cleaning out the Augean stables. You've brought those rivers in and you've cleaned out all the muck that had basically been clogging up Republican administrations, really, unfortunately, even since Reagan, and certainly since George H.W. Bush to George W. Bush.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe I'm trying to read too much into this, Dan, but I wonder if the selection of Vance, given that there were, in some ways, safer choices, politically safer and, let's say, less controversial choices, but yet he went for Vance, if that indicates the waxing and waning of particular groups around him, like Kushner versus Trump Jr., Donald Jr., is one ascendant and one falling in his estimation? Because I'm sure they all had wildly different suggestions for him in terms of VP.
I think that's right. And I think there's, several things in play here. The first is Donald Trump now has the experience from the first administration of seeing just how hostile to him a lot of the people he employed were. Not just, neocons like John Bolton, but there were all kinds of underlings and, sort of minor figures who subsequently turned on him. They got contracts with, MSNBC or other left-wing media. I mean, just the amount of betrayal is staggering. And of course, anyone who's been in politics for a long time, or even even a couple of years, is familiar with this kind of thing. And certainly, people who are aware of what happened in the Reagan administration knows that this is almost to be expected. So Trump, is much more conscious, I think, now of getting the right personnel in. And you see the left, the left is going after this thing called Project 2025, which the Heritage Foundation is running. And they're saying, well, this is, Donald Trump's secret master plan. And he's got all these nefarious, agendas behind it. And it's not that. And Donald Trump really is his own thing. He's not simply whatever Heritage hands him as being, these are your personnel. But the fact that something like that exists, the fact that Trump is much more aware of the need to have loyal personnel who actually are, more or less philosophically sound, that is a night and day difference, again, from what we've seen in the past. So I'm very encouraged by that.
All right. Well, I'll put your article up that we talked about ever so briefly at tomwoods.com/2519, and then also in the video description. I kind of hoped you were going to the convention because I thought, well, the coverage I want and the analysis I want is coming from Dan McCarthy. But on the other hand, I figure you just watch it on TV and tell us what you think, right? Save some money.
Yeah, I think the convention, it's more of a pep rally than is really my kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
And also just the crowds, the hotels. It's a lot of aggravation, and I'm quite content to be responding thoughtfully from a distance rather than being right there with all the noise and excitement.
Yeah, I completely hear that. All right, let's leave people with how to read Dan McCarthy and how to follow what he's doing. I mean, he's a syndicated columnist. His columns are great. I get them emailed to me because I'm on some mysterious list. This is one of these few lists that, even though I didn't overtly sign up for it, I'm glad I'm on it. So I read Dan on a regular basis. But how can other people have the same pleasure?
Well, the best thing to do is to go to the publication I run, which is Modern Age. Modern Age is a quarterly print magazine, but it also has a website with daily updated content. So modernagejournal.com is the website. Again, that's modernagejournal.com. And there you can find works by me, but you can also find works by everyone from Murray Rothbard and Tom Woods to Russell Kirk. And we have a great French political philosopher, Pierre Menant, who has a piece that we're putting up to, in the near future here. So it's a work I think you'll be very impressed with. You can find more of my own personal writing. I'm a columnist for the Spectator World magazine, which is published monthly and which has a website. And also spectator.us is its website. I also write the syndicated column for Creator Syndicate that Tom had mentioned. You can find that usually at the New York Post website or at the New York Sun or at Chronicles Magazine, which runs every column and does justice by me in a nice way. So I recommend all those outlets. My byline is to be found in all of them. And then, I'm here and there and everywhere as need be.
Well, I'll put some links in the appropriate spots, and I hope people consume more Dan McCarthy material, and I hope we're able to talk to you again before too long. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks, Tom.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.